Welcome to the PTTS. Today's day is February 28, 2026. My name is Nang Hong Lam. Today PTTS sessions video is on my situations, emergency affairs, documentary, second update. Anyway, on February 26th, which is about 2 days ago, I tried to make a rehearsal. Basically a quick note on that, on that video, that rehearsal video I made on 2 days ago on February 26th. On this second update, basically try to make a rehearsal on this second update, and it was just, but mainly I was just trying to, it wasn't a really rehearsal video or anything, just trying to drown the voice in my head away. I was at the point about to smash my face against the wall or something, so I kind of just grab this Android phone and start recording myself and saying that I'm doing a rehearsing on second update. So pretty much I just, at the same time, the reason that happened because it was a very stressed out day, and it's also my jogging day, so I had about 5-mile jog and very stressed out day, and pretty much at the time when I was doing that recording video, it's like I still needed to, I was already past my regular sleeping time. I usually sleep before 10 p.m. so it's already around 11, 12 there, and still I haven't eaten my dinner, and need to cook my dinner, and also it was just pretty much a lot of things, very one is just lay on bed and sleep and things like that, and it was just having, so pretty much I kind of in a way I start recording myself basically, and just to drown away the voices in my head, it's so right now, try not to repeat what happened on 2 days ago on that second update. Basically this time, trying to not repeat that. I was just kind of in a way, I just couldn't barely keep myself awake, because I was so exhausted, so stressed out, and have all these things that I need to do, and anyway, I'm just trying to, okay, basically, so that's the note, and it was just, I kind of, in that video, that rehearsal video, I was stressing out on that I sort of having to go on able to request a conference to avoid what happened that day, basically, to kind of in a way that I'm like in this really tough time of my life, and just wanting a chance to be at a conference where there's a crowd of people who cares on what I have to say and things like that. And I felt like, it would have been the outcome that I would want that day, kind of like in a way. So pretty much I really stressed on that, like emphasize less stressing on that, so I felt, and I was talking about, like, during the 4 year that I served as club president of the Mesa Multimedia Club, I felt that was a better, sort of like a better, I don't know, like I felt that people would see that better than that I am a journalist of the Beachcomber. It felt like maybe people don't, for some reason, me as a journalist, nobody cares about journalism, or me as a journalist. It's just like, like there is no, like, respect or mutual toward a person who's a journalist. So kind of like in a way, I felt like maybe the club president of the Mesa Multimedia, maybe because it's considered as a higher position, maybe would able to have people who cares, like maybe able to get some people who cares enough attention, see that I have elected as club president and served for 4 years. Maybe that could grab some, have some respect, or have some mutual, or grab some attention and things like that. I felt me as a journalist just couldn't do that, and doesn't have that. Anyway, so I really, like, kind of like in that video, basically stressing on that, even though it felt like a disaster and everything. And so basically just was stressing on that, like, so and also I felt that it was, and I also kind of like, again, I was that day, I just told, like, was in it, but you just want to say something to kind of like drown avoid the voices in my head and things like that. And I also mentioned something on have to force people to show cares to journalism, like, and so that I could able to have a conference, forcing people to recognize journalism, so that I could request a conference and things like that. So I was saying something like that, and I felt that, that it would have been a better result for people who to not be forced by have to recognize journalism, and able to see that I spend, like, I put out 4 years of my time to serve as club president of the Mesa Multimedia Club, able to see that and able to give me what I request for, that conference where a crowd of people who cares and things like that. So I felt that would have been a better outcome than forcing people to recognize journalism, so that I could force people to give me a conference where there's a crowd of people who cares about what I have to say and things like that. So pretty much I was pointing that out. And okay, basically I just want to point out what I like a quick note on what I said in that rehearsal second update as a reminder to tell me that basically that is an example of like being a journalist. And I felt it's just kind of like in a way it's a rough example, kind of like it's much from my experience. Okay, with that being said, now I'm going to talk about my experience as a journalist. Pretty much my experience as a journalist is much worse than what I just said, kind of like in a way that was just a rough example. So anyway, pretty much if you look at my background / history, I got accepted as a journalist of the Beachcomber on 2002 and 2003. In that 2 years of time, around those 2 years of time, pretty much that is where I did my responsibility and duty as a journalist. So pretty much that's where I'm at right now, writing my situation emergency affairs documentary, and also in the first update I kind of read part of it, just a little example of what I have to go through as a journalist. And I felt that like it's basically I was saying that I have to go through tough struggles to self-train myself very hard on journal keeping daily and beating overwhelming odds to be accepted as a journalist. So pretty much that's what I read out loud, like just part of it and things like that. And so anyway, like I suppose like basically I don't know, as I continue with this like kind of like as a journalist, to the point that just want that just like a tiny bit of living together and sharing, kind of like just that tiny bit of to recognize that I am also part of this world and living in this world and things like that, to the point of just that tiny bit of it. And so to save me from all this contemplation on commit suicide and things like that, felt to that point, it's like and so pretty much I don't know, like for now I just try to basically, for now I'm just gonna take a pause on what I'm saying right now and jump to 2011, which is about this is around 2000, like around when I got accepted as a journalist, and maybe like 1 or 2 years after that, and so maybe around 2000, so around there, it's just, and so I'm gonna jump to 2011, which is some years later, and I find, like, in my sleep, I finally had a sign, what I've been, hoping for and things like that. But it was in my sleep that I finally have that sign, winter leaf, and so so I call it that sign as the winter leaf sign, and it was during my sleep, and it was also during like that period that I felt that I just couldn't take it anymore. I remember I was break down and cry in my room for like days, and just lock myself, and then during one of my sleep I had that sign, which I call it the winter leaf sign. Anyway, just hopefully like kind of speed up my documentary to get there to that day, when I have that winter leaf sign. But like I'm saying, still some years is until 2011, and I have that winter leaf sign. Anyway, like I'm saying, in the first update, that this documentary will start from how it all started, and then events by events, chronological, to explain about each of my situation, emergency affairs, stories. This mean that, so right now I'm currently at around 2002 to 2003. So in chronological order, so the next event would be around those years, and as the events keep progressing, eventually get to 2011, and so so I will get there pretty much in my documentary to the 2011 events. So anyway, there's another thing I forgot to point out on 2 days ago, on February 26th. Could be another reason that was very stressed out. Is basically on that day my mother complained at me more than usual. Could be that also, like basic combination of things that happened that day. So anyway, just kind of wanted to step up my management to don't get myself to be in like what happened on 2 days ago on February 26th. Kind of like in a way step up my management. Like maybe I have to pause it. It's kind of like just pause and stop myself from going on with that. It's just kind of like in a way pause the video and stop myself from continue talking about that. Basically, I'm just gonna stop with that. Just like pretty much this documentary. Why I'm going through so much trouble to write this documentary. It's to explain about all of this. It's like, anyway, on the documentary, I selected May 1998 events to point out that that's how it all started. My situation, emergency affairs started at around May 1998, and it just during those events there were talks in the Pacific Beach Middle School among the students that I have the fastest time and the highest grade on beating the Resident Evil 2 scenarios. So pretty much like I wrote in my documentary, is that it was kind of like I remember focusing on having the fast time and high grade on summer 1998 because part of the school custom that during the summer break students have about 2.5 months off without school. So I get, even though like I'm balancing, hanging out with, spending time with families and friends, not just, focusing on that one thing, the Resident Evil 2, I have to also balance my life and everything. But I did spend a lot of time during that summer of 1998 on having the fast time and high grade on beating the Resident Evil 2 scenario. So in summary, I did beat that game many times, and just so coincident, there is a journalist in Resident Evil 2 who died. His name is John, so journalist John, who died the most cruel and painful death in Resident Evil 2. Anyway, in the storyline of Resident Evil 2, if you beat the game, then you'll find out that journalist John's being locked in prison, and so kind of like in a way, it's very, I suppose, like in a way, it kind of like contradicted, like journalists supposed to be, following their lead, doing the interview and things like that. So kind of like in a way, kind of contradicted that journalist John is locked in prison, and also he have a contact, which is an agent, and her name is Ada Wong, and pretty much in one of the files wrote that journalist John and agent Ada, they are girlfriend and boyfriend and things like that. Anyway, as for other sources where you would find like a story about journalists, but just I felt like just like my thinking, my thinking process or my thoughts is saying that like pretty much like you watch war documentary and things like that, felt like it have to be the journalist who wrote those documentary and things like that. It's like this mean that like in the middle of the war, like the war is going on and fighting, battering each other back and forth, and you see like the journalist is there, kind of like following all those battles, but it's just, I suppose, maybe I don't know, like just hard, kind of like in a way, but at the same time, both sides, they have that mutual on that person's a journalist, and just let him or her just continue on doing his or her responsibility and duty as a journalist, and they continue battering each other, and kind of like just let this journalist do his job and things like that. And or if you've seen like a you know police investigation scene, or things like that, like you see like a crime scene where there's police and like surrounding that crime scene, and you see like the journalist show up, and just flashing the journalist badge, and the police will let the journalist through, and like investigate the crime scene and things like that. I don't know, like more or less, you look at my life and my situations, comparing with the journalists who write about the wars and battles, and also the journalists who investigating like crime scene and things like that. Kind of like you comparing my life and my situation to those journalists' life, and so kind of like in a way you'll see that then I kind of like I vibe the argument that would have been a better outcome if those journalists either die in the war, because they're like in the middle of the war and battles. So kind of like in a way they could get killed. War is there's a lot of casualty in war and things like that, so they could get killed in one of the casualty, and things like that, or like in the crime scene, there's also casualty in those crimes and things, and they could also get killed in those casualty and things like that. So I felt like like I'm saying, if those outcome happen, they get killed in those battles or like the crime scene, then would have avoided, kind of like being in the situation I'm in right now and things like that. It's like, anyway, so pretty much also, like journalists does have some mutuals / respect, like they kind of like in a way, at a crime scene, they just flash their badge and the police will let them through and let them do the investigation on the crime scene and things like that. And the same, like in the war scene, the war, in the war and battles is, they, like the military, they just flash the badge to the military and they'll let them through and things like that. It's like, so in general, like the journalist's responsibility and duty, like in the middle of the battle and like wars and battles, or like doing crime investigations. So pretty much, because there's like a lot of casualty involved, so they don't have to, kind of like in a way, that it is pretty, like it is fact, that they could die in one of those casualty and things like that, so they don't have to, keep having contemplations on commit suicide and things like that. That is why I'm writing my situation emergency affairs documentary, to explain why is my life cursed and filled with so much pain and misery. Couldn't, isn't it pretty like just like another journalist who, facing that fact that I could, just gonna die, could die in one of those casualties and things like that. So I don't have the answer to why. Why, like why my life as a journalist is different than other journalists. I don't have the answer to that. And also, I don't know, like, it also depends on, you just, what I said about journalists is just very general, because that's what people would see journalists as. They're in the middle of the war and battles and around all this casualty, all the, they're doing investigation on a crime scene and things like that. Because my thoughts is most of the documentary on wars are done by a journalist. So in their documentary, they probably don't write about, them, like running around in the battlefield with the camcorder and camera and things like that. Anyway, I mean, there are movies is that you get to actually, see a journalist in the movie and things like that. I mean, but it's just when you look at the generalization that, like, kind of like in a way, because the journalists wrote about those war documentary and things like that, they don't, wrote about them running around the battlefields, carrying their camcorder and camera and things like that. So often, in that generalization, you don't really see the journalist. You only see the documentary on the war and things like that. But like I'm saying, that there are movies where you get to see a journalist in that movie and things like that. Anyway, for now, I'm not gonna go with, listing out those movies that you get to see a journalist in that movie and things like that. But there is this one that I have watched it a few times. It's called, this movie's called Roman Holiday. Roman Holiday, and it's a black and white movie, which is the year that this movie is created. It's 1954, and it's a black and white movie. It has been like pretty considered like a pretty old movie and things like that. So pretty much like in that movie, there's this journalist. He he was pretty much like, playing some card game with his friends and colleagues and things like that, and in the card game he lost a lot of money and owed a lot of money, and also because of his living expenses he owed people money and his boss money and things like that. So pretty much, and then one day a princess escape out of her castle, her palace. So a princess escaped out of her palace, and his boss, like this journalist boss, told this journalist that if he able to get the interview of this what happened. It's kind of like I'll like just get a scoop of what happened on the stories and things like that, and like some gather some evidence and things like that. His boss would tell him that he could clear away the debts that he owed his boss, and could even give him some money in also, on top of that and things like that. Nevertheless, the princess run away from her palace, and she don't know. She is confused about it's like she don't know about how to, kind of like in a way strange. The world is kind of like she was ran into some problem basically after she ran away from her palace. So she one night she was drunk, and she got into the same taxi as this journalist. So and then the taxi drivers say, you have to be responsible for her because the taxi drivers say that they were together and things like that. So he decided, to bring her to his apartment, but he didn't know she is the princess that ran away. And so anyway, nevertheless, when he found out that she is the princess and she is in his apartment, and his boss, telling him that his boss will clear away all his debts and even give him some money if he could get the story on this runaway princess and things like that. So anyway, so he don't want. So pretty much the princess still think that he is sort of like a philanthropist who, showing the princess some philanthropy and things like that, and so he just go along with the princess, seeing him showing the princess some philanthropy and things like that. Then he called up his friend, who's a photographer, and kind of like in a way, to bring his camera with him. And then so as him and his friend taking the princess, touring the princess around the city, his friend would, kind of have secret cameras, like a lighter that it's a camera. So, using that lighter as a camera, taking picture of the princess along the way, as they are touring the princess around the city. And kind of like, having evidences, what happened with the princess, the runaway princess in the city and things like that. So, his friend have all these pictures as evidences and things like that. And then one day, the princess told him the truth, that she is the princess, and the princess have to return to her palace and things like that. And so they kind of like kissed each other, and then the princess have to return to her palace and things like that. And then one day, as the princess doing her public appearance and among a lot of the journalists, and then as the princess is, having handshake with some of the journalists who attended the princess public appearance, and then the princess got to him, and then after he shook hand with the princess, he handed all the picture that his friend had took of the princess to that princess, and like an envelope filled with all the picture. And then so pretty much he didn't publish that that article slash stories on the princess touring around the city. So at the end, he just gave all the picture back to the princess. It was just because pretty much in the story, like he owe all this money to all these people, and he go through so much trouble to arguing with his boss, and his boss finally just argue back. You could get the story on the runaway princess, and I'll clear your whatever the money you owe me, I'll clear that away, and I'll give you some money on top of it, and things like that. And then him and his friend get into fights. His friend saying that I'm in the middle of doing my photography production, and you just call me up and just creating all these problems to my life. And so him and his friend fighting each other along the way, and then he finally told his friend that the princess is living with him, and this story will be a big story and things like that. But at the end of the movie, he kind of like didn't say anything about about meeting the princess, and also he gave the princess back all the picture he took of the princess. And even though he's in all these debts and all these problems, and yet he still didn't say anything about the princess, or show any pictures of the princess. Okay, so my phone's almost run out of battery, so I'm just gonna end today's PTTS session, which is on my Situation Emergency Affairs documentary second update. Thank you for watching PTTS. Thank you for following PTTS. I'm gonna end this video in 3, 2, 1.